Now, good news in Victoria today with just 14 new COVID-19 cases overnight. This is the lowest number that anyone can remember in a long time now. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews will appear at the hotel quarantine inquiry on Wednesday to give evidence about what went wrong at two Melbourne hotels. This will be welcome news for a lot of people. He's been evading questions at press conferences every single day. He's going to be joined at the inquiry by other senior politicians, Jobs Minister Martin Pakula, Health Minister Jenny Mikakos, and Police Minister Lisa Neville will also have to give evidence this week in the inquiry's final week. They have all hardly been upfront with giving the public answers about whose decision was it exactly to appoint private contractors to guard people who've arrived from overseas infected with COVID-19. Joining me now to discuss this is former Victorian Labor MP Michael Danby. Michael, thank you so much for your time tonight. Victoria's former police chief Graham Ashton, on Friday, he gave evidence and he denied encouraging the use of private guards for hotel quarantine at a series of meetings on March 27. There were a series of text messages between him and the AFP boss Reece Kershaw that emerged. And in those text messages, Ashton appeared to blame the Department of Premier and Cabinet. Does this seem to you to put the responsibility for this decision squarely on the Premier's department?
Well, it does, and there's also the exchange of emails between the Prime Minister's office and the head of Department of Premier and Cabinet. It's very strange and counterintuitive, Sharri, that public opinion here is quite mixed. I think people want to get to the end, and it's pleasing to see the figures down to the end of this coronavirus lockdown. They're reserving judgment till then. The polls are very divided, but the appearance of the Premier and the Ministers at the Coates inquiry Tuesday and Wednesday will be absolutely crucial. I think people are reserving their judgment. They want to get past the health conclusions, but I don't see how. Someone said it'd be like Harry Houdini can explain what happened with this hotel quarantine failure, given what Ashton has said and given the published emails between Premier's Department and the Prime Minister's office.
Well, just moving on to those published emails between the Premier's Department and the PM's office, I mean, this is one big thing that the inquiry has already exposed just in the past week. You know, it's effective lies from the Victorian government, including from the Premier, that the ADF help was not offered. These emails showed that to be blatantly untrue. How damaging do you think these revelations have been for the Victorian Labor government?
Well, it's strange, Sharri. I mean, I would prefer not to hear a Labor government imposing a ring of steel, having cavalry chase some lockdown protesters through my local park and onto Elwood Beach, which is just around the corner from here. But the polls are very mixed because people are reserving their judgment. I cannot understand how they let this hotel quarantine be supervised by people who were picked because of conforming with the government's diversity policy. I cannot understand how they were able to not have the police or ADF supervise these things, as was done by other Labor governments in Queensland and West Australia, because as one public servant told the Quotes inquiry, this would give these quarantine hotels a militarised look. Well, bad luck. These politically correct socialist left nostrums seem to pervade some of the public service in Victoria, and the Premier, regardless of what is discovered at the Coates inquiry, should have overruled them. Public health was more important. It all goes back to this hotel quarantine, the deaths, the terrible lockdown, the economic failures we've had to endure here in Victoria, and the personal loneliness and depression that so many people feel. It's terrible in Melbourne. Sharri, I must tell you, people are missing their family. You know, if you're in a minority like the Jewish community that I'm a member of, we're not able to celebrate New Year with you know, even very close members of the family. So it's miserable, and it didn't have to be like this. And it's because of the I even think more than the Premier's decisions, it's the mentality that he didn't override. It's inaction rather than positive actions that I think it's a blame for this. And it's the pervasive PC woke mentality, giving people diversity training when they should have been trained in public health, where they should have had police or military supervising them, as was the normal situation in other states.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to think now, when you hear the evidence that they were worried that it was going to look too much like a military state, and yet we've now got, quite extreme aggressiveness on the part of police when dealing with, a pregnant woman, arresting her in her own home when she was offering to delete a Facebook post, the police treatment of those two elderly women sitting on a park bench by themselves. How do you feel comfortable with how the police are acting at the moment in Victoria? Are you concerned about it?
Well, look, the police are following orders, but there should have been consistent orders with the Black Lives Matter demo and this one. That would have, because you see, when you don't apply it consistently, it undermines the authority of the state and the police. The people think the police are behaving in two different ways. I believe that everyone should obey the law. I believe that we're getting to the end of this lockdown. The Premier's been right. This very harsh lockdown is driving the figures down, but it didn't have to be like this. That's the problem. And it's because of this ridiculous woke PC mentality. We have to employ Indigenous firms from Sydney that have no employees here, and then get a whole lot of poor Indian Australians on $20 an hour on WhatsApp to supervise these things, when it should have been done in the same impartial way it was done in Queensland and West Australia. For all their faults and harshness, Sharri, at least they didn't stuff up hotel quarantine.
Yeah.
We've got 700 deaths, a destroyed economy, people in desperate, lonely, depressed circumstances, all because of this stuff up that didn't have to be.
Yeah. Look, Michael Danby, just finally, the last time I spoke to you on Sky News, you said that the right faction of the Labor Party might be prepared to move on Daniel Andrews depending on the outcome of the hotel quarantine inquiry. Do you think this is still the case?
Sharri, I'm probably the only one who's not scared to speak to you, because of the unintended consequences of the sacking of Somyurak just before this lockdown, and the intervention by the National Executive and the imposition of Brax and Macklin. Everyone is scared of their pre-selection. Everyone is scared to speak, and that's why there's no opposition to some of these harsh measures. Rings of steel, cavalry charges in Elwood Park, by people who would normally be, at the forefront of civil liberties explanations. So I don't see any moves at the moment. I mean, the Parliament's barely been sitting, let alone there being time for internal challenges. And by the way, I wouldn't be looking for someone from the right to succeed Daniel Andrews. I think Jill Hennessy, who's a very capable woman who is also a member of the same socialist left faction that the Premier is, and who's kept a very low profile, who should have been the health minister. She was the health minister before Mikakos, and I have a feeling if she'd been in charge, things wouldn't have been so mishandled.
Yeah. Michael Danby, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.